There are people out there all across the country pushing boundaries to grow the game of golf. Like champion speed golfer Lauren Cupp, who plays faster than anyone else. And Will Lowry, whose work in the golf community inspires more kids to get into the game. As a champion partner of the Masters, Bank of America supports everyone determined to find out what's possible. In golf and in life. What would you like the power to do? Bank of America. Bank of America N.A. member FDIC, copyright 2025, Bank of America Corporation, all rights reserved.
It's time for basketball, and Uber Eats is dropping deals on game day favorites to keep you locked in on the action. Like when you're craving a buzzer beater, but also buffalo wings. Or when an upset makes you want to ugly cry into a pizza. And right now, Uber Eats has game day deals from Burger King, Buffalo Wild Wings, KFC, and hundreds more local favorites. So you can keep your eyes on the ball and your hands on a burger. Order now, only on Uber Eats. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.
This podcast is part of E2C Network, where we share the whole Auburn experience.
Hello and welcome to War Horses, the only college equestrian podcast that is trying to come to grips with all the dang upsets that we saw at the various conference tournaments. And I'm the host of this podcast, Auburn Elvis. Let's talk about some college equestrian. So this past week, it was all about the conference tournament, so let's take a look at some meet recaps. First up is the ODAC tournament. Now remember, this is that single discipline conference that has Sweetbriar and Lynchburg and Swanee, Bridgewater, and Berry. Bridgewater and Berry met in round one in the quarterfinal. These two teams have traded victories in the regular season, but the overall stats suggested a Bridgewater win. Fences went 4-1 for Bridgewater, and flat went 3-2 for the Eagles as well, making the final score 7-3 Bridgewater. So the Eagles advance to the semifinals, and they're going to face number 1 seed Sweetbriar. We'll talk about that in a second. As for the Vikings, their first full NCEA season comes to an end. But like I said, they did get a win a few weeks back, so they have that to build on for the future. On we go to that semifinal action. Let's take care of Sweetbriar and Bridgewater first. The stats give a rather large advantage to the top-ranked Vixens in this one, and once the meet got going, we saw why. Fences went 4-1 for Sweetbriar, and flat did the same thing, making the final score 8-2 Sweetbriar. Convincing win for the Vixens sends them through to the ODAC finals. Bridgewater ends their season. They're probably not going to get one of the 4 invitations to the National Championship Tournament down in Ocala, Florida, but the Eagles are getting better as a program, and we'll see what the future holds for them. The other semifinal was between Swanee and Lynchburg, Swanee being the 3 seed, Lynchburg being the 2 seed. Now, the stats really like Lynchburg in this one, but Swanee has proved to be a tough challenge in the past. Fences went 3-2 for Lynchburg, and flat also went 3-2 for Lynchburg, making the final score 6-4 Lynchburg. Nice win for the Hornets. They advanced to the finals to meet Sweetbriar. For Swanee, this likely brings their season to an end. They made it to Ocala last year, but the field has gotten more crowded this year, and the Tigers look to end up that 5th team with only 4 spots available. So in we go to the championship meet between number 1 and number 2, Sweetbriar and Lynchburg. The stats suggested that this one was going to be very close, so I took the coward's way out and I said it was just going to be a 5-5 tie with Lynchburg getting the tiebreaker victory. The real-world action was back and forth all day. Fences went 3-2 for Sweetbriar, and flat went 3-2 for Lynchburg. That made the final score a 5-5 tie, and when they counted up all the raw judges' scores, the winner was Lynchburg. So see, sometimes the stats are useful. Now Lynchburg emerges as the ODAC champion. They will now likely be the number 1 seed in Ocala. Sweetbriar will likely be the number 2 or number 3 seed in Ocala, but it doesn't really matter much because they're going to face the same team either way. So that's all the single discipline action. Now let's look at the dual discipline tournaments. We're going to start with the ECAC dual discipline tournament hosted by UT Martin. Now this one also had a 4 seed versus 5 seed quarterfinal. 4 seed South Dakota State Jackrabbits versus the Fightin' Pembrokes of the 5 seeded Minnesota Crookston, also known as the Golden Eagles. The stats favored the Jackrabbits, who had won the previous 2 meets between these teams, and let's see what happened. Fences went 4-1 for South Dakota State. Flat went 4-1 for South Dakota State. Horsemanship went 3-2 for Minnesota Crookston, and reining went 4-1 for Minnesota Crookston. That made the final score 11-9 for South Dakota State. So the Jackrabbits win this one in a close one, and they advance on to the semifinals. For Minnesota Crookston, their season's going to end, but when you look back over their results, they really improved each meet. And this time, they won 2 events in the same meet, which I think is a first for them as a program. So they're not only getting points now, but they're seeing some consistently good performances, particularly in that Western discipline. So that is certainly something positive for them to take away from this season. So now let's look at the semifinals. South Dakota State would go on to ride against number 1 seed UT Martin. Now the stats suggested this would be kind of close. Let's see what happened. Fences went 3-2 for UT Martin. Flat also went 3-2 for UT Martin. Horsemanship went 3-2 for the Jackrabbits, and reining went 3-2 for UT Martin. That made the final score 11-9 UT Martin. The Skyhawks advanced to the finals with this close win, but they did take 3 of the 4 events, so I think they could still be encouraged, even though the result was probably a little closer than they wanted. For the Jackrabbits, their season comes to an end with a really good effort. If a ride or two had swung their way in this one, they would have been in a position to pull off the upset. The other ECAC semifinal had 2C UC Davis going up against 3C Delaware State. The stats suggested that we were in for another close meet here. Let's see what happened. Fences went 5-0 for UC Davis. Flat went 4-1 for UC Davis. Horsemanship went 4-1 for UC Davis. And reining went 3-1 for Delaware State. That made the final score 14-5 UC Davis. So the Aggies took this one by a comfortable margin. They rode really well, and they advanced to the ECAC final. For Delaware State, their season ends. They had some ups and downs this year, but they had some bright moments that they can focus on moving forward. So on we go to the championship. Number 1 seed UT Martin versus number 2 seed UC Davis. Like many of these postseason meets, the stats thought this one was going to be close. Let's see. Fences went 3-2 for UT Martin. Flat went 4-1 for UC Davis. Horsemanship went 3-2 for UT Martin, and reining also went 3-2 for the Skyhawks, making that final score a 10-10 tie. And when they applied all the fancy Western equivalency formulas, the winner was UT Martin. So the Skyhawks take their second ECAC title, but boy, they have been runners-up so many times now that to see them get this conference title is pretty sweet for them. They are in the running for that last invite to Ocala, so we'll see how much weight the voters put into this conference championship. For UC Davis, their season started a little slowly, but they had some moments where they looked really strong, and here they ended up one ride away from another ECAC title. They just didn't get it, but still, good job for them. Now, one thing to keep in mind with these recaps, that the results are getting more progressively unpredictable here. So just keep that in mind when we look at the Big 12 tournament. The first semifinal saw 1 seed TCU going up against 4 seed Fresno State. Now, the stats thought this would be close. Let's see. Fences was a 5-0 sweep for TCU. Flat was 4-1 for Fresno State. Horsemanship was a 5-0 sweep for TCU, and reining went 4-0 for TCU as well, making that final score a not very close 15-4 win for TCU. So the Horned Frogs advance to the finals, and Fresno State will sit and wait and see if maybe they get invited to Ocala. Over we go to the second semifinal, 2 seed Oklahoma State versus 3 seed Baylor. Here again, the stats thought we'd see something close. Did we? Well, Fences went 3-2 for Baylor. Flat also went 3-2 for Baylor. Horsemanship went 3-2 for Oklahoma State, and reining went 4-1 for Oklahoma State, making that final score pretty close, 11-9 for Oklahoma State. So the Cowgirls narrowly advanced to meet TCU in the finals. For Baylor, they're going to wait and hope and see if maybe their performance this weekend was good enough to swipe that final invitation to Ocala. So here we go, Big 12 final. For the past few years, we've seen TCU enter the final red hot, and yet they get tripped up by Oklahoma State. The stats suggested that this year was going to be different, though, so let's see. Fences went 4-1 for the Cowgirls. Flat went 4-1 for the Frogs. Horsemanship went 3-2 for the Cowgirls, and I'll say that this was really big because TCU kind of counts on those horsemanship points, so to lose that event like that, that's not great. And reining went 3-1 for Oklahoma State. When you add all that up, you have an 11-8 final score won by Oklahoma State. So big win for the Cowgirls. They really shined during conference tournament season, and here again, they take home their 5th straight Big 12 crown. For TCU, this is disappointing. They lost some key points in this one, and the meet just slipped away from them. But they're still one of the top teams in the country, and they should be somewhere in the top 4 when the invitations to Ocala come out. Now, let's see what happened in the tournament that most of the listeners care about, the SEC tournament. The first semifinal was 2-seed Georgia versus 3-seed Texas A&M. The stats suggested A&M was going to win this one in a close one. Here's what happened. The meet started with the flat, which Texas A&M won 3-2. That's usually a strong event for Georgia, so this could be a bit concerning for them. Reining was up next, and it also went 3-2 for the Aggies, so Georgia was down 4-6 at the half and in need of a rally. And they got it. At least it started with one. In fences, Georgia won that 3-1, so that made things even overall with horsemanship that was going to decide everything. And horsemanship went 3-2 for Texas A&M, making that final score 10-9 for Texas A&M. So the Aggies advance to the final, and Georgia will now wait and see where they get seeded in the national championship tournament. The other semifinal saw 1-seed Auburn take on 4-seed South Carolina. Now the stats predicted this one would be about a 12-8 Auburn win. Let's see what happened. Flat started things off, and that was a 2-2 tie. But this was actually good for Auburn since this is not their best event. But Reining finished 3-1 for South Carolina, so the Gamecocks held a 5-3 lead at the half. But Auburn's two best events were coming up in the second half, so all was still well, or so we thought. Fences went 4-1 for Auburn, so that actually put Auburn ahead by 1 point. But then in horsemanship, the Tigers really got upended, with the Gamecocks winning 4-1, making that final score a 9-8 upset win for South Carolina. So this was a big upset for the Gamecocks. The way they stopped Auburn's horsemanship squad from getting more than a point was huge. That event right there basically decided this meet. So they advanced to the finals to face Texas A&M. For Auburn, this was a big disappointment. We've seen the Western discipline struggle to get points in the postseason, and here it has happened again. The Tigers have just got to figure out how to get at least 3 or 4 points out of the 10 that are available in the Western if they want to win in Ocala. So on we go to the final. Now, in the stats, I didn't even bother running over the stats for this one in the last episode because I was so sure that Auburn was going to win, and that's what I get for being so overconfident. But I can tell you now that the stats do favor A&M to win this one about 10-9 in this matchup. So let's see what really happened. Flat went 3-2 for Carolina, and Reining went 3-1 for Carolina. So South Carolina had a 6-3 halftime lead over Texas A&M. Things are looking good for the Gamecocks. Over we go to the second half. Fences went 3-2 for Texas A&M, and horsemanship went 3-2 for South Carolina, making the final an 11-8 victory for South Carolina. And this victory was just incredible for the Gamecocks. They have endured quite a few seasons now of finishes at the bottom of the SEC, and for all but 2 days of this season, it looked like the same thing was going to happen. But here they are, riding some of their best rides of the season when it mattered most. Just incredible. Hats off to Carol Gwynn and her bunch over there in Columbia. For A&M, well, they had their chance, especially with Auburn eliminated, but they got outridden by a team that just wanted it more. But the Aggies are still a dangerous team for whoever they're going to draw down in Ocala. So that is all of our conference tournament action. I won't do any meet previews this week. I'm going to wait and have another episode before we get to the national championship tournament. And I'm actually going to stop the recording here, and we're going to pause things, and I'm going to hold up until the NCEA does the official bracket reveal on Tuesday night, and then I'll re-record the very end of the podcast so I can discuss the bracket that they reveal. But while we're waiting, I'll go ahead and tell you how I would have ordered things and who I would have invited. First, over in the single discipline tournament, I would give the number 1 seed to Lynchburg. And then that would put them pitted up against number 4 seed Dartmouth.
Uh-oh. The last cookie.
You can get a new box of cookies in as fast as an hour with Walmart Express Delivery.
Are you my guilty self-conscience?
No, I'm the voice offering you promo code EXPRESS for free delivery on your first order.
Hey, who ate my cookies?
You mean, these cookies?
Order now. Welcome to your Walmart. Promotion valid for first express delivery order. $50 minimum subject to availability. Restrictions apply.
Hear that? It's SpringFest savings calling your name. Only at Lowe's. Right now, get a free Select Ego 56-volt battery when you buy a Select Ego trimmer, blower, or mower. Plus, get your choice of any 2 bags of Miracle-Gro organic soil mix for only $16. Shop these can't-miss deals in-store or online today. Lowe's. We help. You save. Valid through 4/2. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. Excludes Hawaii.
I feel like Lynchburg has shown right here at the end that they are just a tiny bit better than Sweetbriar, but again, it is only a tiny bit. Dartmouth, I firmly believe, is not as good as Charleston, so I put the green down in the number 4 spot. So over in the other side of the bracket, that would have number 2 Sweetbriar going up against 3 seed College of Charleston. With Sweetbriar losing and with Charleston winning their tournament, I feel like this is pretty accurate. If you wanted to flip these two and have Charleston at number 2 and Sweetbriar at 3, it really doesn't matter much because they're going to play each other anyway. So that is who I would invite for the single discipline tournament and how I would seed that. Now let's take a look at the big one, the dual discipline tournament. Now, number 1, I'm very sure is going to be number 1 in both my rankings and theirs, is SMU. They're going to be seeded number 1. They didn't have a conference tournament, so they didn't have the opportunity to get upset like everybody else did. So they benefit from that, but that's fine. Everybody knew that going into it. Plus, they were getting a little bit of help from the voters anyway. It all worked out for SMU fine. They're number 1. They deserve it. Now, if I were in charge of things, here's who I would invite as number 8 and slot them against SMU in that first round. I would invite the Baylor Bears as number 8. I think that they looked better in their conference tournament than Fresno State did. They played a stronger strength of schedule than UT Martin did, and I really think that Baylor, especially here lately, they are riding very well, and I give them the nod just a tiny bit over Fresno State, so I would make Baylor number 8. On the other side of the bracket, I would seed as the number 2 seed, I would put Auburn there. Now, here is where we may see some differences because it really comes down to how much weight do you put on the conference tournaments that just happened versus the resume of the entire season. For me, I like to include all the meets that happen. I feel like that's fair, so I would seed Auburn number 2. And I would put them going up against, as the number 7 seed, Georgia. To me, Georgia is a dangerous team, but boy, they are prone to just having off days, and they've had enough of those that they aren't consistent like most of the other teams, and so you don't really know what you're going to get, and that inconsistency to me says, let's put them down at number 7. Now, they could upset Auburn, we'll see, or whoever ends up being number 2, but Georgia, for me, they're the number 7 team. So back we go over to the other side of the bracket where we would have the number 4 seed going up against the number 5 seed. And to me, I would put Oklahoma State as the number 4 seed. Yeehaw! Going up against the number 5 seed, Texas A&M. Now, the voters really like Oklahoma State, and they did just win the Big 12 again, so there's a really good chance that Oklahoma State's going to be number 2 or number 3. I'm not sure they're quite that good. They had a really good tournament, but anyway, if I were doing things, I would put Oklahoma State 4 and make them earn it against Texas A&M. So we'll see where they end up getting seeded. And that leaves our last 2 teams would be the 3 seed going up against the 6 seed. So that would be, I would seed TCU as the number 3 seed. And I would seed South Carolina as the number 6 seed. Now, here again, there is that chance that the voters will put South Carolina above Texas A&M and make them a 5 seed. They also might move TCU down below Oklahoma State. I could see either of those things happening. Again, I don't look at just one weekend. I look at the whole resume. South Carolina, they only had 3 SEC wins when you count the tournament in there. And so, yeah, that's just, I don't know. Well, anyway, that's what I would do it. We'll see a little bit later how the NCEA does it. Okay, the bracket's out. They were going to have a live stream, but I don't know, it didn't start or something. So, but on the website, they went ahead and pointed to the brackets and the championship page and everything. So let's go through who got selected, who got invited, who got put where. First, we're going to do the single discipline. This one went pretty much exactly as I expected. The number 1 seed is Lynchburg. They're going to go up against number 4 seed Dartmouth. So this will be exciting. Dartmouth did not ride against either Sweetbriar or Lynchburg in the regular season, so we'll get to see how good they really are going up against number 1 seed there. Over in the other side of the bracket, we're going to have the 2 seed Sweetbriar going up against 3 seed Charleston. This is how I thought it was going to go, but again, even if you flip these two, it doesn't matter because they got to face one another. So everything went as expected on the single discipline side of the tournament. Over in the duals discipline, we do have some surprises here, and it starts off right out of the gate in quarterfinal number 1. We have number 1 SMU. That was no surprise, but their opponent is a big surprise. It's number 8 UT Martin. So the Skyhawks, because they won that ECAC tournament, they vault all the way up into number 8. They were down at 9 or 10 before the conference tournament, and the 2 teams ahead of them lost. So yeah, Skyhawks, they really benefited from the voters placing a lot of value on the tournament championship. So good job to the Skyhawks. They're going to get to go to their first national championship tournament. This is awesome for them. Okay, so we're going to jump over to the other side of the bracket. This one I correctly predicted. It's number 2 Auburn going up against number 7 Georgia. So this is exactly how I would do it, which means it's the right way to do it. Good job for the voters. Now let's look at the other parts of the bracket here. We've got number 3 Oklahoma State going up against number 6 Texas A&M. Now what's really funny is I would have swapped both of these 2 teams because I don't think either one of them are quite as good, but they would have ridden against each other anyway, so it all doesn't matter. They got it wrong, but they got it wrong in a right way, so who cares? It just means that Auburn will face this winner instead of SMU, or maybe Georgia if Georgia upsets Auburn, or Skyhawks if they upset SMU, but we'll see. Anyway, yeah, Oklahoma State going up against Texas A&M. I think this is a great matchup. I picked this matchup, so there you go. Then that means in the last part of the bracket, we've got number 4 TCU going up against number 5 South Carolina. Now, South Carolina should not be ranked that high, and TCU probably shouldn't be ranked that low, but you know what? It all works itself out because they're going to play each other, and there you go. But the winner does have a pretty big challenge up against SMU, and I think TCU would rather be on the Auburn side of the bracket, but hey, you know what? When you don't win your conference tournaments, you leave your fate into the hand of the voters, and that's what they did, and that's what we got here. But there you go. We got the hottest team in the nation right now, South Carolina, going up against TCU, and that should be a good one. We'll see if the Gamecocks can pull off another miracle there and get an upset. This is a good, solid bracket. The only weird thing about it really is the Skyhawks getting in, and that ain't that bad because during it, they won, and, Fresno State and Baylor, there was a real question as to which of them was a little bit better, and so the voters just kind of avoided the question altogether and said, hey, let's give a team that won a conference championship a shot. Going up against SMU is going to be tough. I'm not sure any of those 3 teams would be able to beat SMU anyway, so it kind of doesn't matter that much, but, upsets happen, so who am I to say? Anyway, good, solid bracket here. For the first time in years, I don't have too many problems with this bracket. I would move around some of the matchups, but I'm okay with all of them pretty much. This is a good, solid tournament. So I'm really shocked at that because, especially given how some of the voters have been doing lately, so they must listen to the podcast. That's what that tells you. Yes. All right. Well, that's pretty exciting. Okay. Good job, everybody. I'm sad for Fresno State and Baylor, but you know what? There's only 8 spots and some teams are going to get left out. And you know what? They really put it in other people's hands by not winning more. And when you do that, you don't got a lot of arguments there. All right, well, that is the end of this podcast. Like I said, I'll do another episode where I will preview these meets and tell you what the stats suggest, although we've seen that the stats aren't 100% reliable, but they're the best we got, so we're going to go with that. So I'll do an episode on that here in the future before the tournament to let you know who is favored in these matchups. That's all for this episode. I'm your host, Auburn Elvis. Well, thank you very much for listening, and war horses.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on the E2C Network. On your way out, I want to remind you to stop by e2cnetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for all our content across our podcast, YouTube channel, and much more. To stay up to date with us, make sure you're following social media accounts such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. While our content here may always be Auburn sports heavy, if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. War Eagle.